In 1878, Manchester was a thriving industrial city in the heart of England, the birthplace of railway manufacturing, which not only employed thousands of workers but helped power the city and also allowed them to become an economic powerhouse within the UK. It was in the railways where Manchester United were first formed. Originally named Newton Heath due to their factory's location, their first ever game was against the engineering and maintenance workers in what was classed as the very first Manchester derby. But at the very beginning, Newton Heath did not play in their trademark red kits. Instead, they wore a green and yellow striped shirt with black lace ties as pictured here in one of their first ever team photos. Newton Heath eventually changed their name to Manchester United in 1902 after joining the Football Alliance in 1888 and moved to their new stadium, Old Trafford, in 1910. United went on to win League One for the first time in 1908 and again won it in 1911 under the management of Ernest Magnall. By the end of World War I, the football industry was the biggest it had ever been. Thousands of fans attended matches every week, with teams like Manchester City and Newcastle selling out seats at Wembley Stadium for the final of the FA Cup. Manchester United unfortunately failed to achieve any success post-World War I and were labelled as the yo-yo team because of their constant rise and fall throughout the football leagues. In 1939, Britain was at war with Germany once again. Football was still held as a morale booster, but due to the ongoing war effort, teams all over Britain were not competing at the same high standard as before. In 1941, German bombers destroyed Old Trafford as they aimed to take out the factories within the city. Because of this, football stopped at Old Trafford for another 8 years as the focus turned to the war effort and rebuilding the city. After the Second World War has ended, Manchester United were appointed with a new manager. This manager was a previous player who had achieved a lot of success during his career playing for Liverpool, the Scottish national side, and United's rivals, Manchester City. But this manager would go on to be the best United had ever had. That manager was Matt Busby.
He was the most famous manager for many years, possibly the most important manager in their history. He was the one who took them from, a decent club to being, the best in the country. He could well have been the Liverpool manager at one stage. He was a Liverpool player. There's a few Liverpool fans out there now who think that would have made a bit different, wouldn't it? He was the person who drove a lot of what Manchester United became. So, for example, in particular with European competitions, he was the one who said, I want our team to play in Europe. At that time, that wasn't a good thing. The FA, I think the Football League as well at the same time, didn't really want English clubs to play in the competition. And he was the one who forced that through. And look at the legacy of it now, the Champions League and obviously English clubs doing well in it as well. So, that's just one legacy. And then you've got the playing side of it as well, where obviously he had a situation whereby he wanted to bring through the best young players and he wanted them to play football the right way. And that's continued ever since.
Going into the 1950s, Matt Busby introduced a new team lineup filled with new youth players. This team would go on to be a huge success once again, and the team were labelled as the Busby Babes.
Why? Because, I remember when I was growing up, my dad wasn't a Manchester United fan, but he said to me, I watched Manchester United play and I watched the Busby Babes. So even someone who wasn't a Manchester United fan and, not necessarily a football fan, he was proud of the fact that he'd seen that team play, which says everything about what Busby had created.
Manchester United became England's first representatives in the European Cup. Busby was delighted by this, despite being hit with controversies by the FA. Busby ignored the criticisms and was determined to bring the European Cup home and to make them champions of Europe. United lost out, losing to Real Madrid in the semi-final of the European Cup in 1957, which devastated the United squad. But a year later, things looked to be going in United's favour when it came to winning the title. Whilst in Yugoslavia, United went on to beat Red Star Belgrade 5-4 on aggregate, allowing them to reach the semi-finals for the second year in succession. Their title hopes were looking promising, but on their way from Yugoslavia, whilst refuelling at Munich, the United squad would face a tragedy that devastated English football and the world.
This is Old Trafford, and today it's the heart of a mourning city. Everybody in Manchester, everybody in Britain nearly, is looking to this ground, and inside the staff are busy answering inquiries, keeping relatives informed of the latest progress of the people who were injured in the crash. And the one question that's in everybody's mind is, how's Matt Busby getting along? It was the first thing that the taxi driver asked me when I got out of the train at the station just now.
Manchester United were playing in the European Cup, and it was frowned upon by the authorities. They didn't really want English clubs playing there, but Sir Matt Busby and the club said, no, we want to play in it. We want to go out there and we want to represent England and we want to do it well out there. And they were playing in this match, and there was a lot of pressure on them to get back because there was a fixture at the weekend. They had to get back in time, and flights are not the same as they are now. You know, you can't have 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 a day. At that time, it was you get the one a day. They had played the match and they had to get the flight home. Now, the conditions were awful, dreadful. Now, I don't know whether pressure was put on the pilot to say, let's get this flight off the ground, but it probably, in hindsight, which very few people of us have, in hindsight, it obviously couldn't have taken off. But if it hadn't taken off and they'd have stayed there, they would have been in massive trouble with the authorities, that they wouldn't be able to fulfil their fixture. And that might have been the end of European football for English clubs, because there might have been clubs might have said, actually, we probably don't want to do this then if we're going to get into trouble for these types of things. It took off. Unfortunately, it crashed. It was a horrific moment for the club, for the players. There was a lot of young players who died. There was staff who died. My uncle, he was a Manchester United fan, and I remember my dad telling me that he didn't talk for 2 or 3 days. And that's the kind of impact it had, in that, you had, such an exciting, such a young team, denied the opportunity to go on, even just that season, denied the opportunity to go on and possibly win the European Cup, but denied the opportunity to play for 5, 10 years. And it was devastating.
Football fans all over England were shocked by the news and sent their thoughts to all the relatives of the ones who had passed away in the disaster.
Well, how do you feel about this tragedy?
Well, too full for words, really. I feel like lost a great sportsman and totally upset.
The fact that you're not a Manchester man made no difference.
It makes no difference. They're a fine team, and I'm very sorry.
And what's your main thought at the moment?
Well, I hope they all soon get better, and I hope, I just hope that, just no words I can express it. I just hope they pull together and try and forget all of that.
We must, of course, send a message to the bereaved, say how upset we are and distressed for them, and send our best wishes to the survivors, and hope that they get along and come back to us in Manchester very soon.
Matt Busby spent months recovering in hospital. Doctors initially said his chances of survival were no better than 50-50, but the whole of England was behind his recovery. And after 2 months, Busby was back home.
They were his. They weren't called babes for a wrong reason. They were his kids almost. They were his. He developed them, and they were like a family to him. So for him to lose that and then have to come back to, let's be honest, it's just football, must have been tough.
In 2006, Sir Bobby Charlton, who survived the disaster, spoke out on his experience during and after the crash, in an interview that was extremely personal and rare.
Well, I just put my head down. I think I put my head down, and the next thing I remembered was waking up away from the aeroplane, and I was sitting strapped into a seat, and I woke up the following morning, and a German read them out. So I'd been asleep for I don't know how long they'd knocked me out for, and that's how I found out who was alive and who was dead. I never come to grips with it. I see quite a few of the relatives, from time to time, and I do feel a little bit guilty. It's our national game, It's a national game, and we were not only representing Manchester when we went, we were representing the country. And I think that it's worth remembering. Well, I wouldn't say remembering too much, but never forgetting, that's for sure.
The early 60s was tough for United as they didn't seem to get any form of success, despite bringing in some big names such as Dennis Law. The Busby Babes name was also dropped as it was seen as inappropriate for the time. The nickname for the team was changed to the Red Devils, as that name was seen as intimidating when going against other teams. Despite coming 19th in the 1962-1963 season, United did manage to come back to beat Leicester City 3-1 to win the FA Cup this same year. That following season, United brought in a new player to the starting 11. This player was only 17 when he made his first team debut and would go on to be one of United's star players. This player was George Best, and together with Bobby Charlton and Dennis Law, became one of the best attacking forces United had ever seen. Things only got better for United as they went on to beat Benfica in the European Cup final 4-1, helping United to become the first English team to win the European Cup.
The team which Matt Busby built had three of the best players in the world up front. If you had one of them, you were lucky. You know, you had a Northern Ireland international, you had an England international, you had a Scottish international, and all three of those teams were blessed the fact that they had George Best, Dennis Law and Bobby Charlton. But to have all three of those in the same team meant that they had a team which was capable of beating the best in the world. And they showed it on that night when they beat Benfica in extra time in the European Cup final. All of them came to the fore, all of them played well, scored important goals, and you know, that was just a fantastic strike force and a fantastic team.
Bobby Charlton made it 4-1. Manchester United had well and truly done it. They were supreme soccer champions of Europe. At last, Matt Busby, the maestro of Manchester United, had groomed a team great enough to beat Europe's best.
It's been a wonderful climax to a wonderful season for you.
It certainly has. It seems as though one thing has been coming on the top of another. It has been wonderful.
What was your reaction when you heard this news?
Well, there was a feeling of, naturally I was delighted and very proud. I felt that this has been brought about by a lot of people around me, who probably due more credit than I am. This is my wife and family, my mother, all the football people, the teams and the players. And really, they've contributed to the position more than probably I have done.
As your career has reached each new pinnacle, the rumours have come that you're going to retire. Will you retire this time?
Yeah. Well, I keep hearing this, and I don't feel as though I'm ready for that just yet. When the directors and the club itself have had enough of me, I'll probably start considering it.
After the 1968-69 season, Busby did go on to retire. It was the end of an era for the United squad, and fans praised Busby for the work he had done with United, achieving 5 First Division trophies, 2 FA Cups, 5 FA Charity Shields, and 1 European Cup, making 13 incredible career trophies. However, after a miserable season in 1970-71, McGuinness, who had taken over the managerial role, quit due to the fans and board's lack of faith in his system. Busby was convinced to come back and put the team back in order. Unfortunately, at this period of time, United's relationship with their star player George Best was getting extremely heated, and it looked like Best's interest was on other things away from United.
Earlier, Sir Matt had watched the United players train at their practice ground. Best should have been among them, but once again he failed to turn up or send a message. Sir Matt returned to his office at Old Trafford, phoned his directors and called a press conference.
So Matt, there's some talk about George being ill in some, and this having a bearing on present troubles. Have you heard anything to this effect?
My dear fellow, I haven't heard the thing since Thursday. Friday morning we haven't heard a thing. Saturday, Sunday and this morning.
In fact, you've no idea where he is, Sir Matt.
I couldn't tell you whether he's in Manchester or whether he's in England or London. I couldn't tell you. I had no contact. He's made no contact. And as I said to all you lads this morning, he knows where to find me. The door's there waiting for him. Yeah. I'm not going looking for George Best.
George Best was probably a first for the football industry, certainly in this country, in the sense of he wasn't just a footballer. He was a superstar on and off the pitch, and unfortunately the trappings of being a superstar caught up with him.
This morning, United's manager, Frank O'Farrell, in his confrontation with George Best, had to decide both how much punishment to hand out to his star player and how indispensable Best was to the team. United's shop is an indication of the way the fans regard Best, the biggest crowd puller in British football. He has the lion's share of the souvenir market.
You know, you look at the highlights reel now, that, you know, the goals that he scores, the tricks that he has, on the pitches that they played in those days as well. You know, you can imagine him playing on the pitches these days. He'd be Lionel Messi, and he'd have the same kind of things that Lionel Messi has now to protect him from some of the things that he didn't have quite so much protection in those days. So George Best, you know, the best player in the world at that time, but just probably the wrong era.
The club say that his problems are not new and don't involve either his girlfriends or his wages. It's thought he decided to play truant after a loss of form and depressing inability to regain it. Club officials feel his football concentration and therefore his chances of getting back into top gear are diverted by his considerable business interests, leadership of Manchester's discotheque world, and life continually in the public eye. The club feel an accumulation of these problems caused their most famous player to give in to the pressures and the strain.
After some lacklustre performances from Best at the start of the 1970s and the lack of any real respect for training sessions, Best eventually left the squad in 1974, along with Bobby Charlton, who left just the year before. After Busby's short return, United went through a roller coaster of seasons, finding themselves going through manager after manager. Tommy Docherty took over after Busby and saw United get relegated for the first time in 36 years. Dave Sexton quickly took over from Docherty, but again failed to achieve any form of success.
You know, whenever the top person leaves any kind of an organisation, perhaps certainly within a football club, there's always that period whereby it's going to be different. And when you have someone who is so successful, it's very rare that the next person who comes in can match that success. In recent years, you might have had that at Barcelona and Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, Manchester City possibly as well. But in those days, it was very rare. At Liverpool, they did it, but other clubs didn't at the time. And so replacing Matt Busby was a job you didn't want. You kind of like wanted to be the person after the person. But unfortunately, they from their point of view, they never quite got it back. Well, not for many years did they get it back, and went through a huge slump where they actually dropped out the top division, which for a club the size of Manchester United should have been unheard of.